The engines of America's auto industry are stalling, and it's not just bad luck. A brutal trade war ignited by Donald Trump's tariffs has triggered devastating retaliation from Canada, striking at the very heart of U.S. manufacturing. From Detroit's assembly lines to the smallest Midwest towns, the shockwaves are destroying jobs, wrecking supply chains, and fueling an economic firestorm. As costs skyrocket and factories shutter, one question looms large. Has Trump's gamble pushed America's industrial backbone past the point of no return? Let's dive deep and find out. The first strike: how Trump sparked a trade war disaster. On February 1st, 2025, President Trump announced sweeping tariffs, 25% on almost all Canadian goods, with a lighter 10% on energy. His goal: crush competition, reassert American dominance. Instead, he lit a fuse under the most integrated trade relationship on the planet. Canada, once a quiet economic partner, didn't flinch. It retaliated with a fury Washington didn't expect. 25% tariffs on U.S. exports worth 30 billion Canadian dollars, aimed with sniper-like precision at America's most sensitive industries, chief among them, automobiles. The U.S. auto industry relies on a seamless cross-border flow of parts and vehicles. A single car can cross the U.S.-Canada border 6 or 7 times before completion. Trump's tariffs blew up that delicate balance, shattering decades of cooperation, and when Canada responded, the damage was immediate and personal. American cars, trucks, and parts, once welcome in Canadian showrooms, now carried crippling costs. Trump had promised to bring the jobs back. Instead, he threw a wrench into the very machine that kept them alive: Canada's counterattack, tariffs that crippled Detroit. The numbers told a grim story. America exported $56 billion in automotive goods to Canada in 2023 alone, its largest foreign market. Now, thanks to the tariffs, that market was evaporating. Canadian plants assembling U.S. vehicles like the Chevrolet Silverado and Ford SUVs faced impossible choices: absorb massive new costs, pass them on to consumers, or find non-U.S. suppliers. Most didn't hesitate. Imports from Japan and Europe surged as Canadian consumers turned their backs on American vehicles, spurred on by a sweeping boycott movement. Polls showed 62% of Canadians pledged to avoid U.S. goods entirely, a figure rising weekly. Estimates suggested that each U.S.-built vehicle destined for Canada would now cost $3,000 more. That wiped out automaker profit margins almost overnight. For Detroit's Big Three, GM, Ford, and Stellantis, the tariffs were a gut punch. Plants slowed production, orders shrank, workers faced furloughs, and in the Midwest, where political loyalty once burned bright for Trump, fear turned to fury. This wasn't just a skirmish, it was economic warfare, and America was losing. The supply chain breakdown, America's auto industry in freefall. Beneath the headlines, a deeper disaster unfolded. The U.S.-Canada auto industry wasn't just about finished vehicles. It was a living, breathing organism where parts zipped across borders daily in a finely tuned dance. Trump's tariffs shattered that choreography. Canadian trucking companies slashed U.S.-bound loads by 70%, choking the arteries that fed America's assembly lines. Michigan and Ohio factories, once running on tight, just-in-time schedules, faced critical part shortages. Production lines slowed to a crawl, every link in the chain felt the shock. And the administrative nightmare of proving USMCA compliance piled on even more delays and costs. Even so-called exemptions under the USMCA agreement failed to stem the bleeding. Vehicles and parts that didn't meet strict North American content rules faced new tariffs anyway, adding layers of bureaucracy and pain. Inside Detroit boardrooms, the whispers grew louder. If the crisis dragged on, they would have no choice but to move more production to Mexico or beyond. America's auto empire, built over a century, was now lurching toward collapse, and the man who promised to save it stood helpless as it burned. Factories on the brink, layoffs, closures, and chaos. The human cost of the trade war hit like a tidal wave. In Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, once the beating heart of American manufacturing, factories slowed, then stopped. Workers were furloughed, shifts were canceled. Entire plants faced closure. In Hamilton County, Ohio, canceled steel contracts signaled the beginning of a mass layoff cycle, rippling through the entire automotive ecosystem. From the foundries that molded engine blocks to the small-town suppliers crafting wiring harnesses, the chain reaction was unstoppable. Truckers hauling auto parts lost contracts overnight. Tool and die shops relying on steady work from GM and Ford shuttered their doors after decades in business. By March 2025, economists warned that up to 500,000 American jobs could evaporate if the standoff continued. Every canceled order pushed them closer to bankruptcy. In the Rust Belt, a chilling phrase began circulating among workers: Trump's recession. He had promised a renaissance. Instead, he delivered devastation. And as factories dimmed and parking lots emptied, America's industrial might, the symbol of its global power, crumbled in real time. Rust Belt rebellion, political fallout hits Trump's base. Trump's political fortress was collapsing from within. The very voters who had propelled him to victory, working-class Americans from rural and industrial states, now felt betrayed and abandoned. Farmers crushed by Chinese tariffs, auto workers destroyed by Canadian retaliation, truckers sidelined by crippled supply chains. In swing states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, once solid red counties began shifting. Local leaders warned of a rebellion brewing in the heartland, fueled not by ideology, but by raw survival instincts. Town halls turned hostile. Union leaders who once endorsed Trump publicly denounced him, demanding an end to the self-inflicted economic carnage. Pollsters reported plummeting approval ratings in key battleground regions. Campaign strategists, once confident of re-election, now whispered of an electoral collapse. Trump tried to rally his base with fiery speeches, blaming Canada, China, and anyone but himself. But the words rang hollow in towns where plants stood idle and groceries grew unaffordable. The cracks weren't just political, they were existential. The foundation of Trump's America was splintering, and it might never heal. The road ahead. Can America's automotive empire survive? The stakes couldn't be higher. Without swift action, analysts warned, the U.S. automotive industry faced permanent decline. Higher costs, broken supply chains, and lost global competitiveness threatened to shift production permanently to Mexico, Asia, or Europe. Ford and GM already began floating plans to expand factories south of the border. New investments in U.S. plants were frozen. Stock prices for America's Big Three tumbled. Meanwhile, foreign automakers, Toyota, BMW, Volkswagen, saw an opening. With lower costs and fewer political entanglements, they ramped up production, capturing market share that U.S. companies could ill afford to lose. The dream of a made-in-America manufacturing revival faded under the harsh glare of reality. Trump's trade war meant to protect American workers had instead exposed just how vulnerable and dependent America had become on a globalized system it could no longer control. The road ahead would be brutal. The question now wasn't whether America could win the trade war. It was whether America's auto empire could survive it at all. America's factories are faltering, its workers betrayed by the very policies meant to save them. As the trade war deepens and alliances crumble, the future of American industry and American power hangs by a thread. If you want the truth they don't want you to hear, hit subscribe, stay informed, and join the fight for what's left.